I love Halloween. It's my favorite time of the year. I love dressing up, carving pumpkins, watching horror movies, and of course trick or treating. I'm 16 years old, but I still enjoy going around the neighborhood with my friends and collecting candy. It's a tradition that we have been doing since we were kids. This year, however, things went horribly wrong. It was a dark and stormy night. The wind was howling and the rain was pouring. My friends and I decided to go to the old mansion at the end of the street. It was rumored to be haunted, but we didn't believe in ghosts. We thought it would be fun to explore it and maybe find some hidden treasure. We knocked on the door, but no one answered. We tried to open it, but it was locked. We looked around and saw a window that was slightly open. We decided to climb through it and enter the house. As soon as we got inside, we regretted our decision. The house was creepy and dusty. There were cobwebs everywhere, and the furniture was covered with sheets. The walls were decorated with paintings of people with twisted faces and bloodshot eyes. The floorboards creaked with every step we took. We heard a loud thud from upstairs. We looked at each other nervously and decided to check it out. We climbed the stairs and followed the sound. It led us to a door that had a sign that said, "Do not enter." We ignored the warning and opened the door. We wished we hadn't. Inside the room, there was a man dressed as a clown. He had a white face, a red nose, a colorful wig, and a big smile. He was holding a chainsaw in his hand, and he was surrounded by body parts. He had been cutting up people who had come to trick or treat at his house. He saw us and grinned even wider. He said in a raspy voice, "Trick or treat." We screamed and ran for our lives. He chased us with his chainsaw, laughing maniacally. We tried to find a way out, but all the doors and windows were locked or boarded up. We were trapped. He caught up with us in the living room. He swung his chainsaw at us, cutting off one of my friend's arms. He fell to the floor, bleeding profusely. He begged for mercy. But the clown showed no pity. He cut off his other arm, then his legs, then his head. He turned to me and my other friend. He said, "Who's next?" We backed away from him, but he cornered us against the wall. He raised his chainsaw above his head and prepared to strike. That's when I woke up. It was all a nightmare. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked at my clock. I heard a knock on my door. I got up and opened it. It was him, the clown. He smiled and said, "Trick or treat." My friends and I had a tradition of going trick or treating together every Halloween. We always had fun, dressing up in different costumes and collecting as much candy as we could. We never cared about how old we were. We just enjoyed the thrill of the night. This year, we decided to go as the characters from our favorite horror movie, The Conjuring. I was Ed Warren, the paranormal investigator, and my friends were Lorraine Warren, his wife and psychic partner, and the Perrin family, the victims of the demonic haunting. We thought it was a clever and scary idea, and we hoped to impress some of the other kids with our costumes. We met at my house around 7 p.m. and headed out to the streets. We went from door to door saying trick or treat and getting candy from the friendly neighbors. We also got some compliments on our costumes, which made us happy. We were having a blast until we reached that house. It was a large and old house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The windows were dark, the paint was chipped, and the lawn was covered with dead leaves. It had a sign that said for sale, but it looked like no one would ever buy it. It was the perfect setting for a horror movie. We decided to check it out, thinking it might be fun to explore it. We walked up to the porch and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. We tried to open it, but it was locked. We looked around and saw a side window that was slightly open. We decided to climb through it and get inside. We entered the house and found ourselves in a dimly lit living room. It was filled with dusty furniture, cobwebs, and old newspapers. It smelled like mold and decay. We felt a chill in the air, as if someone had left the freezer open. We looked at each other and smiled nervously. We thought it was creepy, but also exciting. We decided to split up and explore different rooms of the house. I went with Lorraine while the parents went upstairs. We agreed to meet back in the living room in 15 minutes. We walked around the house looking for anything interesting or scary. We found nothing but more dust and dirt. The house seemed empty and abandoned. We wondered why no one had lived there for so long. We thought maybe there was something wrong with it, something that scared people away. We decided to go back to the living room and wait for our friends. As we walked down the hallway, we heard a loud thud from upstairs. We stopped and listened. It sounded like someone had dropped something heavy on the floor. We thought maybe it was our friends playing a prank on us. We decided to play along and pretend to be scared. We shouted, "Hey, what was that? Are you guys okay?" There was no answer. We waited for a few seconds, expecting them to laugh and come down. But they didn't. We started to get worried. We thought maybe something had happened to them, something bad. We decided to go upstairs and check on them. We ran up the stairs and looked for them. We found them in one of the bedrooms. They were lying on the floor. They were not moving. They were not breathing. They were dead. They had been stabbed multiple times in their chests. There was blood everywhere. There was a bloody handprint on the wall. There was a note next to them that said trick or treat. We screamed. We turned around and saw him. He was standing in the doorway. He was wearing a black cloak that covered his entire body, except for his face. His face was pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes and a thin mouth. He looked like he had just crawled out of a grave. He was holding a large knife, dripping with blood. He looked at us with a creepy smile. He said, "Trick or treat." We wanted to scream again, to run away, but we couldn't move. We felt paralyzed by fear. He reached out his hand and grabbed us by the arms, pulling us closer to him. He whispered in our ears, "You're my treats tonight." He lifted us up and carried us inside the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. We heard him laugh, a low and sinister sound that echoed in the dark. He said, "Don't worry, it won't hurt much." He brought the knife down towards our chests. I was 12 years old when it happened. It was Halloween night, and I was out with my friends, dressed as a vampire. We were having fun, going from house to house, collecting candy and scaring each other. We decided to go to the last house on the street, a big old mansion that looked haunted. We had heard rumors that it was owned by a crazy old man who hated kids and never opened his door. We rang the bell and waited. No answer. We rang again. Still nothing. We were about to leave when we heard a creaking sound from behind the door. It slowly opened, and we saw a shadowy figure standing in the dark. He was wearing a long black cloak and a mask that looked like a skull. He had a deep, raspy voice that sent shivers down our spines. "Trick or treat?" he asked. We were too scared to say anything. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a large bowl of candy. He held it out to us and said, "Take one. Just one." We hesitated, but our greed got the better of us. We each grabbed a piece of candy and ran away as fast as we could. We didn't look back. We thought we were safe until we got home and opened our candy wrappers. Inside each one, there was a razor blade, covered in blood. I love Halloween. It's the one night of the year when I can dress up as anything I want and go around the neighborhood collecting candy from strangers. My friends and I always have a blast, comparing our costumes and seeing who can get the most treats. This year, I decided to go as a zombie, complete with fake blood, torn clothes, and a realistic mask. I thought it was the coolest costume ever until I met him. He was standing on the porch of a house that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The windows were boarded up. The paint was peeling, and the lawn was overgrown with weeds. He was wearing a black cloak that covered his entire body, except for his face. His face was pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes and a thin mouth. He looked like he had just crawled out of a grave. He was holding a large bowl of candy, but he didn't say anything when I approached him. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if this was some kind of prank. Maybe he was one of my friends in disguise, trying to scare me. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. He had a scar on his left cheek, just like the one I'd seen on the news. He was the serial killer who had been terrorizing the town for weeks, killing people at random and leaving behind a bloody handprint as his signature. He was the one they called Candyman. I wanted to scream, to run away, but I couldn't move. I felt his breath on my neck, cold and foul. I tried to break free, but he was too strong. He lifted me up and carried me inside the house, slamming the door behind him. I heard him laugh, a low and sinister sound that echoed in the dark. He said, "You're my treat tonight." I struggled and kicked, but it was useless. He threw me on the floor and pinned me down with his weight. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a knife, gleaming in the moonlight that shone through the cracks in the boards. He raised it above his head, ready to strike. He said, "Don't worry, it won't hurt much." He brought the knife down towards my chest, but before it could pierce my skin, I heard a loud bang. The door burst open and a flash of light blinded me. I heard him scream and drop the knife. I looked up and saw a police officer standing over him, pointing a gun at his head. He said, "Drop it. You're under arrest." The officer kicked the knife away and handcuffed him. He lifted me up and carried me outside where an ambulance was waiting. He said, "You're safe now. We've been tracking him for days. We finally got him." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I thanked him for saving my life. He said, "You're welcome. You're very lucky to be alive." He asked me my name and where I lived. He said he would take me home and notify my parents. As we drove away from the house, I looked back at it one last time. It looked even more sinister than before, like a haunted mansion from a horror movie. I wondered how many other victims he had taken there, how many other lives he had ended there. I shuddered and turned away. I realized that Halloween would never be the same for me again.